What's up, everybody? It's Alex from Heavy New York, and on the phone we got Axel Rudi Pell. Thank you for your time today, man. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Hi, Alex.
Yeah. It's so awesome to have you here. The newest album is Sign of the Times, which is scheduled to come out in May of 2020. Do you just want to talk about how the making of this record was and everything with it so far?
Okay, I think the record might be out on 8th of May, as far as I know.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, 8th of May.
No problem. So, yeah, the making was great, you know. I had so many ideas for recording and during my writing process, and it was just very relaxed. You know, we went into the studio, recorded everything. We had so much fun, and everybody gave more than 100% as usual, yeah.
That's awesome. You know, you'd be having so many albums out now. Like, do you still take a new approach to every single album that you make, or is there maybe kind of like a formula that you tend to stick with?
No, that's not a formula. It's only, you know, I'm only taking formulas in my working way because, you know, I'm writing every time. You know, I'm writing every day. I'm writing every moment a thing comes to my mind. You know, I have always my cell phone with me. I have this voice recorder in. And sometimes when I pick up the guitar just for playing a bit, you know, sometimes the riff comes to my mind. I say, "Wow, that's a cool riff," and I press the recording button on my cell phone, so just to keep the idea, you know. And later on, I'm sitting down and listen to all these little bits and pieces I recorded before on my cell phone, and I make a big list, you know. I say, "Wow, that's great. Idea number 34 fits perfect to idea number 347, maybe." You know, that's great. So I'm always writing. It's always fun, yeah.
Yeah, I gotta say, you're probably the most consistent artist when it comes to putting out albums because, you know, you do have an album like every single 2 years. Night's Call came out in 2018, Game of Sins came out in 2016, Into the Storm 2014. I gotta say, I'm very impressed with how you're able to constantly keep it coming every 2 years.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm impressed too. But, you know, the longest the fire is burning inside myself, you know, the flames are still there. And I make music with passion, you know, and you can feel it when you listen to it. You say, "Wow, this is cool."
Yeah. That's what I've noticed, because especially within guitar and soloing, like, I feel like it conveys an emotion just as much as like vocals or lyrics could do. Like, when you're writing stuff, does it like almost represent an emotion that you're feeling at that particular time?
You know, no. You know, because, you know, when I write these little things, you know, I have to write a guitar solo too, you know. So I have in the backing track and say, what can I do? What can I do that it sounds very emotional and in the typical ARP style? And I'm working around on the guitar with the melodies of the solo and structure, you know. And most of the time I find something really cool. Most of the time, yeah.
Do you have a background in, like, theory? Like, do you know what scale you're working off of, or, like, key or anything like that? Or do you improvise with your guitar work in a way, and you're self-taught?
You know, sometimes at first I improvise a bit to find the right melody, you know, and then I say, well, now that wasn't too cool, let's try something different, you know. And, yes, when I say, wow, now this is 100%, I will keep that, you know.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to like every single album that you've made, whether it's, you know, Ruling the Earth from Steeler or any of your solo work, is it almost kind of like a self-portrait, like representative of who you are at a specific time period?
Absolutely, you're right, definitely, yeah. It concerns, you know, every record is about how the magic is in the air at the moment, you know, and it represents the right magic at the right time. That's what to say. I don't know.
Do you almost kind of like, you mentioned like you're, you know, looking for inspiration to create music and stuff like that. Do you almost have to like be alone? Like, do you prefer to be alone with your guitar, or do you like to maybe be around other musicians and stuff like that, and that can help influence you in a way?
Every time I create everything by myself, being alone, definitely, because otherwise it wouldn't work with myself, you know. I have to be quiet, I have to concentrate, and as soon as other people are around, you know, they are disturbing the peace, you know, so disturbing any creativity. So I have to be alone, and sometimes it happens that I actually go out to the grocery store and getting some stuff to eat, for example, and suddenly a melody comes to my mind, just a vocal line or something, and I'm still pressing the voice recorder button, you know, and I'm singing on that. Sometimes people are looking at me and say, "Oh, this stupid guy doing over there," you know, but I don't give a fucking shit about that, you know, I don't care. So I do it and but done, you know. I'm always writing, yeah, but I have to be on my own, yeah.
Yeah, I would love to go into the grocery store and see you like in songwriting mode. That would be the best grocery store trip ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And like I've noticed that even with this particular album, that like many songs have kind of like different vibes in a way. Like I thought Gunfire and Bad Reputation was different from a song like Waiting for Your Call or Wings of the Storm or something like that. Like do you ever when you're writing a new album have like a preconceived vision on what you want to do in a way, or do things kind of just happen by accident sometimes?
Everything happens by accident. No, I don't have any vision. No, I don't sit down and say to myself, now I have to write a fast track or now I have to write a ballad. All comes naturally to my mind, you know. Of course, I think I had ideas for 2 more ballads. Just ideas, but I only pick up the strongest one, you know. Say, the others, let's get rid of it, you know. So, yeah.
Yeah. When you play like a very fast song or a very, aggressive song versus a ballad, is it almost kind of like playing like I have to imagine it's almost like a completely different vibe and like it's almost like a completely different strategy playing a faster song versus a slower song, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, yeah.
Yeah. Is it true that like because when you're playing like a slower song, you're much more vulnerable? Like I heard like if you're playing a slower song live and you slightly botch a note, it's so much more noticeable than when you're playing a fast song.
I think there's not much difference, you know, because I have to concentrate because every single track, doesn't matter if it's fast or slow, you have to be. The heart has to be open, you know what I mean. So it's not much difference there, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you ready for the most difficult question of the interview?
Yes.
How do you know when a song is done?
That's really a tough question. When I like it, a song is done. You know, when I'm sitting there, you know, after collecting these little bits and pieces all over the month, you know, I'm sitting down making a huge list and say, the idea, just like I said, and then I put together all these little bits and pieces, and then I sit down and recording everything by myself. I play the rhythm guitars, I sing with my bad voice on it, you know, I play the bass on it, play little keyboards on it, and and then I say, could it be like this, or should I change anything? I ask myself, you know, and then I listen back the next day and I say, wow, this is great. It will stick it like I recorded it yesterday, you know. Yeah, it has to be. I have to be 100% satisfied with that outcome. If not, I would change it.
Okay. Yeah, Adam, and aren't you always worried that like you're changing it so much? Like it's got to be hard to like when you have a song that you like, but then you want to add this or take away that. It's always such a big risk on what the final outcome is, right?
Absolutely, it's a very big risk, you know, especially when you're recording in the studio and the drummer just left and is returning to the States in Bobby's case, you know, so I can't say, I will have another intro for the track, you know, so I have to be sure before, definitely, but it never happened, you know. Every time I'm recording a record, as soon as it's done, I love it, you know, so no changes at all, luckily.
Yeah, very lucky. I'm sure there's a lot of musicians listening who are envying this right now. Now, being such a prolific artist between your solo stuff and your stuff with Steeler and working with other, you know, projects, is there a different mind frame or is it a different strategy into playing depending on the project that you were with at that time, or is there anything similar about it, or is it completely different for each project?
You know, when somebody's asking, can you contribute a solo to my project or anything, I said, of course, but I will play typically ARP style. You know, I never would change my playing style. You know, if somebody's looking for, a technical player who plays, something different, which I would normally not play, I'd say I'm the wrong guy for that, you know. So I would play it in my style, and the feeling is the same, you know. I deliver everything is 100% ARP, so I don't have to change anything then, yeah.
Yeah, and I'd imagine when you're collaborating with an artist, they're looking for you to bring your own mix into like, it's not like you have to adjust or you have to change anything in a way.
That's right, absolutely, yes, 100% correct.
Yep. Now, you're using the Fender Stratocaster, right, when you play still?
Yes, I'm always using Fender Strats, that's right, yeah, because they're the best instrument in the world.
Yeah, what was it about a Fender Stratocaster that, especially when you're playing rock and roll, and with how many different guitars out, what is it about a Fender Stratocaster that ultimately attracted you to it?
You know, it started, you know, when I when I wanted to be a musician way back in the beginning of the 70s, yeah, I saw Deep Purple perform on TV. I saw Richie Blackmore throwing his guitar around, and I said, what kind of guitar is this? This looks great. I said, wow, that's a Fender Stratocaster. And then I saw pictures of Jimi Hendrix with the same guitar. I said, whoa, it must be a cool instrument, And I tested it, and for me it was that guitar which I had to get, at some point. So I always, I tried different guitars. Somebody told me, hey, what about a Gibson? Why don't you play Gibson Les Paul? They're sounding great, especially for metal. I said, okay, I tried it, but, from my personal kind of taste, every Gibson sounds the same. Every guitar player is playing the Gibson, I can't hear any difference, so that's really weird. With the Strat, you have difference, and it's the Fender Strat, it's much heavier to play. It's not that easy. So when you play on a Gibson, the neck is it's shorter, the neck is thinner. I can play very, very fast on the Gibson Les Paul, but I can express myself more on the Fender Strat because it's more difficult to play, and it's more, especially when it comes to bending a note. So the Fender Strat neck is a little, how we say, curved or something, and when it's very much harder when you bend the note to have the right key or whatever. With the Gibson, it's much easier, but I prefer the Fender Strat. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, do you have your own custom model, or do you just use any sort of Stratocaster? Is there a specific type of?
No. Mostly I played the reissue of Fender 1970. A reissue, I think they called Voodoo Strats at some time. They released it I think it was the beginning of the 2000s. The guitar is really, really cool because it's this huge headstock, like a 70s headstock, and I replaced all the pickups. I'm using DiMarzio HS3 pickups because it has a little more output than the original Fender pickups, and then all my guitars have a scallop neck like Yngwie or Richie Blackmore's, so because it's better, it has a fuller, warmer tone, and it's more comfortable to play, I think.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing which I changed. Yeah.
Yeah, I've noticed that every type of band, I've seen smooth jazz players play Fender Strats, but I've also seen people in like death metal bands play right. Fender Strats. It almost seems like they're perfect for any style.
Absolutely, I agree. Yes, it sounds different. It depends on which kind of amplifier and effects you're using, of course. Yeah.
And that led me into my next question: what kind of amplifiers are you using in your arsenal of gear?
Since a few years, I'm always using Engel amplifier, the Powerball 1, and I'm really satisfied with this amp. It's great sounding. For me, it sounds like a good tuned Marshall amp. I really love that kind of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and you prefer to use tube over solid state amps? Because I've noticed that there's some people who are preferring solid state over tubes now.
No, not really much, because there's too much going on with the solid state, from my opinion. It's much easier to play over Powerball, so you don't have that much little buttons or knobs or anything to press. I'm a very easy guy. For me, an amp has to have only maybe 5 different, how you call it, the thing you have to turn around, like a volume thing and a bass in the middle.
Yeah.
And that's it, I don't need much more. A little gain, the master volume or anything like that, that's enough for me.
Yeah.
I'm not into that amps which has so many different things in there, or are getting weird,
Yeah, and do you use any pedals at all, too, since you tried to...
Yeah, I'm using the Ibanez Tube Screamer for a little more distortion, but I'm just putting it, it's on, I don't have adding too much distortion to it, but it has a little more, the guitar, the rhythm, especially the rhythm guitar, has a little more attack then, So this is on, and I'm using a Crybaby wah-wah pedal, and what else? I'm using an IntelliFX Rocktrone for live shows, which has some delays and reverbs and stuff like that,
Awesome.
So that's it.
It feels...
and what I'm using too in the studio, I forgot about this, is it's a Line 6 Pod XT, this little kind of thing which has all these little amplifiers and sounds stored in there, and then I found my own sound in that, and I how do you say, I started, because then I have my own sound in that kind of thing, It's very easy when you're playing when you have to play for somebody else, you know, I say, no, I have my sound with me, because you don't have to build up an amplifier and all the cabinets and stuff. You know, and it's very easy to work with. That's cool.
It's just great to talk to a guitar player who has a very simple setup, unlike a lot of guitar players I've interviewed who have like 40 pedals on stage with them and like 20 different amps and stuff.
That's right. They're doing a step dance on the floor.
Yeah. Yeah, there was one band I saw. They had to have their pedal board like completely on the other side of the stage from where they were, just because it was so big.
Oh yeah. I don't like it at all. You know, the more technique you have, the weirder it all gets. You know, I'm getting crazy from that. You know, which button I have to press now? Wow, I can't remember. I'm sorry. I have to do a step on this, step on that. I can't remember. I'm sorry. No, that's too much.
Yeah. Leave the pedal stomping to the drummer.
Yes, yeah.
So before we go,
blame everything on the drummer. The drummer is always the worst guy in the band. You know, blame everything on the drummer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and your famous saying, if your drummer sucks, your band sucks.
Sorry?
If your drummer sucks, your band sucks. You don't want to mess with him.
Yeah. Don't mess with him. No.
So, before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time today. Is there just anything else that you would like to promote for the new album, especially during this time? Can we be expecting maybe some live shows or anything like that?
Oh, no, not really. But thank you very much. My pleasure, and thanks for your time.
Of course. Thank you. Everybody, we're here with Axel Rudi Pell, Sign of the Times, out May 8th. Be sure to pick it up then, and we'll see you next time.